All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Kim Dorman, and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to hear Chris Smith talk about his book, The Whole Okra, and then join Tessa Desmond in conversation. Before we start this evening's program, I'd like to thank the Seed Farm at Princeton, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association of New Jersey, and Land, Language, and Art, a global initiative from Princeton University Humanities Council. I'd also like to note that this program is part of the Mayor's Wellness Campaign because okra is so good for you. Before I introduce tonight's program, I do have two people that I'd like to say a few words before we get started. First, I'd like to invite Walter Desmond to come up to speak briefly about what he's doing in the back. And it might, yeah, come on. Thank you. So, Walter, can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing? You can either speak at the podium or just use that mic.
Let's use this.
If you could come a little bit closer to that. Okay, great.
So in the back, we're selling okra starts and ujama seeds. So basically, this summer I started a farm stand called Noam Chomsky's Farm Stand.
Noam Chomsky's.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like bringing it kind of here. So the okra starts are $5, and the ujama seeds are $4 each.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for such good growing. This plants are wonderful. I'd also like to welcome Devin from the Northeast Farmers, or NOFA, NJ, to speak a little bit about his organization.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Chris, for being here. Thank you, Tessa, for setting this up, and thanks to Princeton Public Library for having us at this event. NOFA, New Jersey, for those of you who aren't familiar, is almost 40 years old. I can't wait to celebrate our anniversary. And in that time, we've done so much to support local food, organic farming, and the food system as a whole. Right now, we're currently focused our efforts on expanding our outreach to really support the entire state of New Jersey, to equip farmers with tools that they can use to be more resilient, and to just have fun with food. And so while we're having fun with food, it's always good to be reminded where food begins, and that's what I'm really excited about here is we don't think about the seed or the seed farmer often enough. But without the seeds, without the seed farmers, we don't have that independence. We don't have the food that we love so much. So please enjoy this, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Devin.
Thank you so much, Devin. When Tessa reached out to the library to say, would you be interested in hosting Chris Smith to talk about this? My immediate enthusiastic response was yes, absolutely, because I love the book and I love okra, and I've had so many wonderful conversations with staff members and other people saying, I had no idea that there were so many varieties of okra, so I feel like we're already learning even before the program begins. Chris Smith is the executive director of the Utopian Sea Project, a food and farm-focused nonprofit. He's a passionate advocate of seeds and the diversity they represent. He collaborates on the Heirloom Collard Project, hosts a seasonal trial to table event series, and publishes Crop Stories, a crop-specific multimedia project. In 2023, he was awarded the Organic Growers Schools Organic Educator Award. And you can find out more about his work either at blueandyellowmakes.com or utopianseed.org. After Chris's presentation, he will be joined in conversation with Tessa Desmond. Tessa Lewinsky Desmond is a scholar and a farmer. She teaches classes on food, farming, and literature in the Efron Center for the Study of American at Princeton University, and co-directs the Seed Farm at Princeton, which I hope you'll hear a little bit more about this evening. Chris, thank you for coming.
Please join me in welcoming Chris.
Okay, thank you for having me. I was trying to remember if this is the furthest north I've been to talk about okra, and it may be. Obviously okra is such a big known staple in the southeast that I don't often get asked to come all the way up north to talk about okra. So I'm super grateful to be here and share a little bit about okra with you all. I don't have a lot of time to talk about okra. I could literally talk about okra for days, and would like to talk about okra for days, but we've got about 30 minutes. So what I've decided to focus on today is some of the food aspects of okra to get you excited about okra. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the food and the agricultural work that I do with the Utopian Sea Project and with the seed farm here in Princeton. And then I'm hoping there's going to be time for some questions and some conversation with Tess so that we can kind of steer the ship wherever you guys want to take it towards the end of the presentation. So I'm just going to jump into it. This is me. I wrote a book about okra. I think we've covered that. But this is my family. And I used to show this photograph just to show that, like, while I was writing this book on okra, my family was very supportive and allowed me to make some okra slime and smear it over their faces as an experimental face mask. But really, I feel like this represents more than just my family at this point, because 2019, this book was published. So it's 4 years ago now. It feels like a long time ago. And in some ways, when I started this okra journey, I went down all these rabbit holes and did all this research and grew a lot of okra, and it was amazing and fun and exciting, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with you. But since publishing that book, I feel like that was the start of my okra journey, and I've been able to have so many amazing connections with people through food, and I always just like to start reminding myself or reminding you that, like, food is and should be a unifier of people, and we all eat every day, hopefully, and by sharing food and sharing culture and growing food and saving seeds, it's a baseline that we can all share, or should all share, but we've been distanced from the food system and how food is grown in ways that are really damaging to, I think, our health and our community. And so just to reorientate ourselves around food and farming, I think, is just a real kind of sacred practice on some level. And for me, it started with okra, and as we get to talk about the Utopian Sea Project, it's branched way beyond okra. We work with so many different crops and so many different organizations and so many collaborations, but it all, for me, began with okra and with crazy little experiments like putting okra slime on my child's face. Just to kind of give a little context here, this was based on a Zimbabwean tradition that I came across in some obscure book that I found. And really, it's literally just okra pods that have been boiled and blended. So it's just straight up okra pod slime. But okra has this amazing mucilage in it. A lot of people refer to it as slime, and that slime is really rehydrating. And so it makes a really good cosmetic product. The cucumber slices, which are actually okra slices, was my own invention, but the slime itself was not made up. That's based on an ancient practice of skincare. So let's get into the real stuff. Okay, so okra. You can see from this map where most of the okra production happens, and do I have a pointer? No. You can follow along. You can see red areas in Africa, red areas in Asia, and these are the two major centers of where most of the okra diversity came from in the world. There's a lot of culinary exploration to be done in okra, and we're going to get into some of that, but I would just immediately encourage you that if you kind of run up against a wall with okra, or you've got okra in your brain in a fairly small box of maybe fried okra or gumbo or some of the limited American ways of using okra, then just know that there's this massive culinary cultural tradition that came from before okra came to the United States. So go to Southeast Asia, go to India, go to China, look for all those recipes. The internet is a wonderful thing in this regard. And then go to Africa and all the African countries, and they all have their own okra culture, which is really, really worth exploring. But then if we trace okra from those original centers of origin, Asia and Africa, then okra traveled across the Atlantic with the slave trade and landed in South America around about the 1500s, and then it traveled up through the Caribbean and finally came into the United States, earliest documented evidence, around about the 1600s. And then as an African crop that ended up in the States, it got adopted into southeastern foodways, largely through the hands of enslaved cooks, as many of our southern crops are African origin crops that got adopted into southern foodways. in many ways, it was a poor man's food of the South. And there's this wonderful poster that got printed up by a friend of mine in the South saying okra the people's vegetable. And I think that's a really awesome call to action for okra, because it really is a crop that can feed people. And that's what I really want to get out of this presentation as we go through some of this stuff. Like, okra has so much potential to feed people in so many different climatic conditions that it should be our staple. So we're going to definitely dive into that. But one thing you'll notice from this map that I also want to point out is that Europe, the continent from which I come, has no okra production in it. It is without color. And so I grew up in England, and I grew up with a life without okra, which in hindsight is very sad. But it wasn't until I came to America that I first experienced okra, and I experienced okra for the first time as a gardener, or like truly experienced okra for the first time as a gardener. About 10 years ago, I came to the Southeast, and I was initially like amazingly excited to grow in the Southeast because it's so much warmer than it is in England that you can just grow a whole host of different things that you can't grow in England. And so I would phone my mum up, and my mum's a big time home gardener, and I'd phone her up and go, I can grow peanuts, I can grow sweet potatoes, I can grow peppers without a greenhouse. I'm like all these different crops I could grow, and I was very excited to do it. And as if anyone's a gardener in the room, you'll know that it's easy to get overexcited, and I planted everything I could get my hands on, and I had a totally overambitious garden, but I was like, it's warm and everything's going to grow, and I was very excited. And in that crop mix, I included okra, not because I was in love with it at that point, just because it was another exciting crop to try, basically. And what comes with all that beautiful heat of the South is a whole bunch of pests and diseases, and there's animals here that don't exist in England. You've got like raccoons that are devastating to corn. You've got possums that will come and climb and eat things. You've got deer that for some reason just seem way more aggressive than they do in England. They can jump higher. I think it's because everyone in America likes superlatives. Like, your deer can jump higher, they can eat more, they just like destroy gardens in a way that I had never experienced as a British gardener. And so that garden that I was excited about and boasted to my mother about in the beginning, by the end of the summer was just like devastated by everything. You know, the squash beetles had taken out the squash, and the blight had taken out the tomatoes, and just everything was falling and dying apart. And then the one crop in that garden was okra that survived and was productive, and just nothing seemed to be able to take it out. There was no pests, there was no diseases. In fact, the house that I first rented had a balcony, and just by sheer chance I had planted the okra by the balcony, and by the end of the season it was about 13 or 14 feet tall, and I had to be on the balcony to harvest the okra. And it was just like, it just blew me away completely. I was like, I had this childlike innocence around okra in the beginning, and just to see everything else be completely decimated by all these southeastern pests and diseases, and to see okra be so magically productive and delicious. I was really enjoying eating it. I was just enamored from the start. And so that was effectively the beginning of my kind of journey with okra. And straight away, a strange thing happens. And I'm going to jump through some quotes that kind of reflect what happened to me when I went out into the world as a new to America person, and started telling everyone how much I loved okra. Okay, this is a famous chef from New York. I hate okra and grated mountain yam for the same reason. They are both slimy. This is a southern food writer. So few people eat okra, more radishes are grown in this country, that it never even makes it onto the list of top 10 most hated foods. That's a low blow. Like, it's so disliked, it doesn't even make it onto the most disliked food lists. And then Robin Williams, this one stings the most. Okra is the closest thing to nylon I've ever tasted. It's like they bred cotton with a green bean. Okra tastes like snot. The more you cook it, the more it turns into string. And so these are famous people saying these things about okra, which is sad. But I would go out into the world, like new friends, tell them what I was growing and loving. I would I used to work for a seed company in Asheville, and I went to a lot of southern agricultural conferences and would bump into farmers and people and tell them how much I loved okra. And literally at least half of them would just go, oh, okra, slimy, oh, okra, I hate it. And it just felt so strange to me to, on one hand, be falling in love with this amazing crop that was so productive, and then to have like half the population telling me they hated it. And so in the early days, I started giving a presentation, and this was kind of like, you know, British guy in America, naive, but I had a presentation called In Defense of Okra, where I felt like I needed to stand up and defend okra's honor on some level. And that was the beginning of some of my research into like, okay, if I'm going to stand up and give a presentation on okra, I can't just say I really like it. I need to go a little bit deeper than that. And so I started researching okra and looking into what other people were saying what was good about okra. And I really didn't have to dig very deep to find just an amazing wealth of information. And that's really where the book journey started, was I got to this point where I was finding quotes like this. And this in many ways like encapsulates what the entire book is about. The subtitle of this book is A Seed to Stem Celebration. And that's a summary statement of this, which is, the desirability of cultivating multiple purpose crops cannot be overemphasized. For crops that can produce several kinds of useful products make efficient use of land. The pressure imposed by expanding populations and higher standards of living will force us to produce food, feed, forage, fiber, foliage, and fuel on increasingly limited land resources. So that's taken from a paper that's written in the 1970s. So that's 50 years ago. There was a guy who had identified okra as a crop that could produce multiple yields from the same crop, and that we really needed to be looking at those types of crops because we were getting limited land access and resources. So that's like 50 years ago, and it feels like 50 years later we still haven't quite realized that the earth is a limited resources and we're screwing it up. And so one of the beautiful things about okra is I think it really has the potential and the power as a food source to displace a whole bunch of large-scale commodity crops like corn and soy in a way that we could still get useful food products off the okra that could replace the corn and soy products. But okra can be grown in a way that doesn't require as much intensive, chemically driven, harmful agriculture. So if we can get the message out to the right people and do the work with okra to get it grown on a large acreage scale, then it could have real serious impacts on our environment and the food that is grown within it. So we're going to jump into some fun food stuff, but always hold in the back of your head that one of the reasons I really want to popularize okra on a large scale is because the crop itself could be very healing to the earth and beneficial to our climate. Okay, so I'm going to go through the next section fairly quickly, 10 minutes or so. I love the food side of things. Mention quickly the trial to table dinners that we do in Asheville. I truly believe that it's food that will change the world. Agriculture is what grows the food, but it's the food that will change the world. It's the food that will get people excited. It's the food that will bring community and connection. And so we do a lot of front-end food work to change people's minds with food, and then on the back end of that, we work with farmers to supply the food that people want. And so Okra does it all. It's called the Whole Okra. The Whole Okra is edible or useful or amazing, and I just want to share a little bit of that with you. So this is more of like a whistle-stop tour of some of my favorite okra things. I had to start with the pod just because I should acknowledge that the pod is edible. Hopefully you know that. The pod is the most consumed part of the plant. In fact, if you play word association games with anybody, you can try this with random friends and say okra, most people's mental image will be a small green pod. That's what most people think about okra. Most people won't be able to tell you what an okra plant looks like. Most people wouldn't recognize an okra flower, and yet that whole plant has some beneficial uses. So I'm not going to go very deep into the pod uses. because that's kind of fairly widely known and recognized, and you can find that information easily. But I did want to share this like early growth stage of okra with you. What you're seeing on your left are okra microgreens. Microgreens are big industry, and you know there's some pushback about microgreens because they're kind of like intensive to grow and use a lot of seeds. But there is an industry there for them, and okra has these cotyledons. That's the first leaves that emerge from the seed, and they're really thick and juicy. And I don't know if you've ever had sunflower microgreens, but they've got this real delicious nuttiness to them. And okra has that same delicious nuttiness in the cotyledon stage. So, and then these varieties have red stems, and so they're beautiful. So if you happen to be a market farmer that grows microgreens and works with high-end chefs, you could make a killing selling okra microgreens to them. And we've had some successful collaborations in Nashville with the okra microgreen industry. Okay. So one quick acknowledgement about okra, which I have to say, because it's after people complaining about sliminess, the second complaint I hear about okra, and this is from gardeners, it drives me crazy, is okra is too productive. I just want you to sit on that for a while and go like, why would we complain about a plant that is too productive? It's just it's the most ridiculous thing, but honestly, if you speak to gardeners, they'll be like, okra gets away from me, okra grows too quickly, okra produces too much, okra gets too big too quickly. Like all the things that we want from all the other plants is a bad thing when it comes to okra. So I like to share what you can do with the overabundance when it comes to okra, because it dehydrates really easily. And so every year I take pounds and pounds and pounds of okra and I slice it and I dry it down. And about 2 pounds of okra goes down to 4 ounces of okra. And most of that is moisture loss. And so effectively what you're doing is taking, I can't do the math, 80-ish% water and getting rid of all that and being left just with a highly concentrated, very flavorful dry product, which I store in jars. And then once you get into winter and okra isn't growing, then these okra rings just, if you rehydrate them into a soup, then basically as they reabsorb the moisture of the stock, just the flavor of a gumbo made with dried okra versus the flavor of an okra made with a gumbo made with fresh okra is astounding, because one of them is 80% water and one of them is now 80% stock as it rehydrates. So dried okra is what to do with all that excess produce. There's lots of other things, but that's the easiest go-to if you've got a dehydrator. This is another kind of like spin on that, where you can take those fresh pods and dry them down and then grind them. This is straight out of West Africa, where they'll dry okra pods on like tin metal roofing and then grind them into a powder and store that powder. This becomes like an incredible thickener. So I have a jar of powdered okra on my shelf over the winter, and pretty much anything I cook, like soup, stews, you can do like vegetable patties, it'll bind them because that sliminess comes back and is a natural binder. And it just adds flavor, nutrition, and a little bit of thickening to anything you cook. So just simple ways to use the pods if you're a gardener. I like sharing this one just because it's a little bit different. This is a chef friend in Asheville that does okra kimchi. And you think of kimchi as being like a grated cabbage or something like that. In this case, the chef keeps the okra pods whole and rolls them in a coarse sea salt. And the sea salt's just sharp enough to puncture the edge of the okra. So you roll the okra and you end up with a big pile of rolled okra, and it starts kind of sweating to pull out the moisture as the salt does. And then you make your chi paste, and afterwards you mix them together and allow it to ferment. And of all the recipes in this book, this is the one that makes my, after all these years, makes my mouth water, because it's the sourness of the ferment and the crunchiness of the fresh okra, because it's a raw okra product, and then the spiciness of the chi paste, just like it's a magical okra kimchi dish. So it's one of my personal favorites, and I make it every year. And then this is to show you a surprising one. Okra is in the Malvaceae family, or the mallow family. There's lots of crops in the mallow family that are pretty well known, like cotton and chocolate. And another one is marshmallow. Marshmallow root. Marshmallows were originally made from the root of the marshmallow plant. And so all of the mallow family members have this inherent sliminess, this mucilage in their plant structure, as does okra. So We thought, I worked with an author called Katrina Blair, who wrote an awesome book called The Wild Wisdom of Weeds, where she uses a whole bunch of common weeds to make incredible food. And so she came up with this idea of taking the okra pods and using that sliminess to basically make a tacky fruit leather, where she blends the pods, adds a little bit of honey and vanilla, lays it out on drying sheets, dries it down until it just goes tacky, rolls it up, cuts it into little cubes like this, and then rolls it in powdered cashew flour. So just 4 ingredients, but they're like little gummies, little sweet okra-y gummies. And this is kind of I don't do this often enough, but it's like I want to walk around all the time with these, and whenever anybody says I don't like okra, I'm going to give them one of these, and then they have to take it back because they're sweet and delicious, and nobody can not like these things. So yeah, okra marshmallows were kind of like a fun side experiment. Okay, so moving on. Again, there's so many different things to be done with okra pods, but that's not really my focus. So okra leaves often surprise people that they're edible. They have a higher protein content than the pods. They do have they have trichomes, which are kind of like real small microscopic hairs that will cause the itching. If you've ever grown okra and harvested it bare armed, then you would have felt the okra itch. It's like an infamous itch. So I'm sure you'll learn about this year, the seed farm interns. So I always harvest okra long sleeved. I did a personal experiment once where I harvested my entire field short sleeve just so I could experience the okra itch, and it was drove me insane. Literally, I was like, ugh. It was terrible. So don't do that. But if you can cook them in any way, shape, or form, then all those spines go away. It's kind of like cooking nettles. They're not stinging after you've cooked them. And they're deeply, deeply nutritious. Okra has a real close relative called Abelmotius manihot, which in the Pacific Island nations is the most consumed edible green. And when you look at the nutritional analysis on those greens, it blows brassicas out the water, it blows spinach out the water. It's just like, on every metric, it's an incredible nutrient-dense green. And effectively, we have fields and fields of people growing okra and not harvesting the greens, just focusing on the pods. And okra is so productive in this region, or at least in the southern region, I assume it'll be pretty similar up here, that you can harvest the greens and get a pod harvest. This is a true dual cropping opportunity that you could be doing okra greens and pod harvest. And we use it in kind of Southeast Asian turmeric coconut cream curry type dishes, and there's a lot of great recipes out there around the Pacific Island nation green, the abica, that I just substitute in okra greens. So leaves are a definite go-to. We've worked with chefs in Asheville. They've done okra chips, like kale chips, in a deep fryer. They put them in pakora instead of kale. So lots of substitutions as a cooked green. And then it's kind of connected to the leaf. The petiole of the okra or the petiole of any plant is the part of the plant that joins the leaf to the stem. So there's the leaf stem, effectively. And it turns out that some varieties of okra have a hollow petiole, and quite a fibrous hollow petiole. And so we started cutting them into 6-inch pieces and drying them down and making okra straws as a kind of a biodegradable straw. It's totally effective. And the cool thing with these straws are that when you start drinking them, then the moisture on the end of the straw rehydrates it slightly, and the mucilage comes back out, so you kind of reactivate the slime on the end of the straw. And the reason that's cool, not just because it's slimy, the reason that's cool is because there's multiple studies out there that show that the okra slime has antimicrobial properties to it, and they've started using it in lots of medicinal applications. And at the time of COVID, I was going to launch a business that these could be shareable straws, because you could drink them and then pass them on. It never took off. But if anybody wants to have it, then go for it. But we do use them at events, and they're fun and they're useful, and then we just compost them at the end. Okay, the okra flower, beautiful. It's very closely related to hibiscus. So if you've seen hibiscus flowers, you might recognize this flower. It's also totally edible, if not slightly intimidating with that large stigma. But yeah, you can eat these flowers. They don't last very long. Like squash flowers, you can cut them and then keep them in the fridge for a few days and they'll be totally fine. Okra flowers, once you cut them, you've got like hours and they kind of disintegrate. So the main way we use them is we harvest a bunch of flowers. Once you've cut them, they kind of like shrivel up like this, but they're still fresh at this point, and we just dehydrate them. So we dehydrate masses of okra flowers. If you Google okra flower tea, you'll find a whole bunch of Chinese websites selling okra flower tea. So it's a thing. There's been quite a few different studies done on the phytochemical properties of okra flowers, and I forget the actual nutrients, but basically the summary is they're good for you. So this is a good addition to a winter tea, and that's the main way I use okra flowers. But we did do a few different experiments. We took those dried flowers and steeped them in water to make the tea. You lose the red color when you steep them in water. It negates the red straight away. So we steeped them in vinegar, and in the vinegar, it kept it, like this one on the left is the vinegar infusion, and that's just like maybe 30 minutes after we started soaking them. After a couple of days, it went a real deep kind of blood red color. So after we steeped it in vinegar, we tried steeping it in vodka, because that just feels like a natural progression. And this bottle in the middle is okra flower vodka, and that you can see that super dark color. And it's kind of surprising because most of the okra flower is yellow or cream, and there's just that tiny little red at the center of the corolla. But this is what happened. We got this beautiful red color, and it felt normal or inevitable that once we'd made an okra flower vodka, we had to make an okra flower vodka Bloody Mary, which we had to garnish with an okra pickle and drink with an okra petiole straw, which is what you see on the right. So that's the whole okra in an alcoholic glass. So that's kind of like the flowers. The flowers, I think, are a good crop because the okra produces in such abundance that if you're getting overwhelmed with pods, you can just go out and harvest flowers, and that'll slow down the pod production, and then dry them for tea would be my top recommendation. And then the last food part I want to finish on, which is an exciting part of it, and I think this is where there can be real food systems effect, is the dried seed. So okra is grown from a seed and then produces a seed, and it produces a lot of seed. When you look at seed yield data, then it's equivalent to sunflowers and soybeans and some of the top kind of like grain oilseed crops out there. So okra is very productive as a seed crop, and when you look at the macronutrient profile of those okra seeds, it's similar to grains like soy. So it's got a good balance of carbohydrates and proteins. And so it really could be used as a pseudo grain in many ways. And again, there's a few different African countries that have started using okra seed flour as a biofortification agent to increase the nutritional profile of their wheat breads. And we've worked with bakers here, and it makes a fine loaf, and a healthier loaf because it's not just wheat-based. But what you're actually seeing here are a few different preparations of those seeds. So on your left, we have okra seeds that have just been roasted in a pan until they've gone brown, and then we've ground them in a coffee grinder, and it looks like a pile of coffee, and actually smells like a pile of coffee. And there were some, in the 1800s, people were trying to make a coffee out of okra seed. It doesn't really taste like coffee, but it smells like coffee. The one in the middle is an okra seed that's just being ground, like with the hull on. So that's like an okra seed flour. And then the one on the right that is a little more pale has been dehulled, so the thick kernel has come off. It's just the white center, which is much harder to get to, but makes a much finer flour. And that's where most of the nutrients are concentrated. So lots of flour potential. Again, we've had local bakers make a sourdough and a savory muffin out of the okra seed. This is an acorn flour recipe that I substituted with okra flour to make an okra flour pancake. So it's like dark and nutty and pretty tasty. And then outside of those flour applications, and you can do anything with those flours. You can put it in quiche crusts, etc. But the thing that I'm most personally interested in, as much as I like using the flour, is the fact that the okra seed also has an oil content. And it's a relatively low oil content in the grand scheme of oilseed crops, but you can press, this is just a little hand crank press I have, you can press okra seeds and get an edible oil, and the edible oil is really tasty. It's kind of like a light olive oil. Some people describe notes of pepperiness or citrus in it. There's one guy in Georgia pressing okra seed oil, and he told me he had to like upscale his entire press and put a bigger motor on it because it's so hard to press okra seed because it's got a thick hull and a small oil seed content. So there's kind of like a barrier to okra oil seed becoming a thing just because there's not enough okra, not enough oil in each seed basically. So this is a picture taken 2 days ago where the Princeton Seed Farm and Tessa and some of these interns over here have helped us plant out over 1,600 okra plants as our third year of an okra seed oil breeding project, where I don't have time to go deep into this, but basically we've taken the okra varieties that have shown to have the highest oil content, around 20%, and we've crossed them all together, and then we've planted out their children and saved those seeds, and then this year at the seed farm in Princeton, we've planted out over 1,000 plants, over 1,600 plants, in the hope that some of those genetic recombinations will come together and give us a bump in oilseed content. So we're aiming to be around 35%. It may not happen in one jump. It might take like 2-3 jumps to get there, but our main aim is to get to a point that's higher than 20%. And maybe by the time we get to this fall, then this would be like the first major breeding project to increase the oilseed content of okra, and with pushes towards a potential southeastern oilseed industry based around these okra varieties. So for me, this has been like a dream project since 2016, and I'm super excited and grateful to the seed farm for helping me pull it off, because it's something that I literally couldn't do on my own. I don't own enough land to plant this much okra. So this is kind of like a key relationship with Princeton that I'm really grateful for. And then the last thing with the okra pod uses are a little bit offbeat. One is, you can see the dried seeds here. That's what we use for the flour or the oil, but the pods themselves, once you've shelled them all, still have a use. You can't really eat them; they're like wood, basically. But I have pasteurized them and inoculated them with the oyster mycelium and grown oyster mushrooms on them. So these oysters on the left are grown on spent okra pods, like what would be a product of this oilseed industry that we're trying to develop, or a pseudo grain okra industry. They actually burn really, really hot and make really good fire starter material. And then the other part of the plant that's left over after this process is the stalks. So if you harvest your leaves, you harvest your flowers, you harvest your pods, at the end of the season you're left with a big long stalk in the field. And another characteristic of Malvaceae family plants is that they have a really solid bast fiber. All the tensile studies that they've done on okra fiber put it comparable to hemp fiber. And there's this massive revolution in America at the moment to grow more hemp for hemp fiber. And that's great. I like people growing hemp. But you don't get an edible product off of hemp. You just get the fiber at the end. Hemp is being split into a hemp seed and hemp fiber crop, so you don't really get a decent seed crop off of the hemp fiber. But okra, you could have your cake and eat it. You could grow the okra, you could have a full market season on the pod harvest or whichever part of the plant you wanted to harvest, and at the end of the season you've got a very viable fiber crop. And I'm not really a fiber person, but I've been working with some folks that we've gone through the process to extract the fiber from the stalks, and this is a friend of mine that ran it through a spinning wheel and made our first okra skein, and then another friend took it to Durham and was going to run it through a loom, and hasn't done it yet. But effectively we could get to a point where this could be woven into clothing. It could be used in composites, it could be used in industrial applications. This could be a composite fiber that you could make tractors out of okra fiber. So lots of industrial applications, as well as like the local cloth movement applications for okra fiber. Okay, so the summary of all this, and there's so many other things that okra can do, but is this final quote, which is, "In reality, okra could have a future that will make people puzzle over why earlier generations failed to seize the opportunity before their eyes. In the botanical kingdom, it may actually be a Cinderella, though still living on the hearth of neglect amid the ashes of scorn. So this is what we're trying to change. We're trying to make okra realize its potential. Okay, so I think it might be good to broaden, like, I've just got a few pictures of okra growing and was going to use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the field work, and I don't know if you want to start talking more broadly about seed farm work with 15 minutes left to go.
Go through your photos, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a real short overview of some of the okra work we're doing in the field, and we'll give you a little bit of a sense of like the Utopian Sea Project, I think. So this is 2018, which was my first like big okra grow out. We had 76 varieties in the field, and we're really just doing a basic like observational variety assessment. At this stage, I really just wanted to show people that diversity existed in okra, because again, back to that first statement, people just think about that green pod, and I knew okra was more than that, but there wasn't very much evidence floating around out there that was easily accessible to show people just in their face that there was a whole bunch of okra diversity. So in this particular field, we have 60 varieties, and then at a separate farm, I did 16 varieties, and these are all red varieties. And you can date it because there's a 4-month-old hanging off my chest. That's my little Zoe, who helped me write this okra book by keeping me awake. So this is a random red variety trial with a whole bunch of different red varieties. And so I just started photographing and cataloging all these different varieties. I kind of like, this is a photograph from the random red variety trial, and I kind of like showing it because there's one variety on here called Red Wonder, and I wonder if anyone can guess which one it is. Any guesses?
Second row, second from the left.
No. I can't hear you.
Bottom left.
Bottom left. The okra, the only wondrous thing about it is that it's not red. Okay, so red okra could be grown as a landscaping plant. It is stunning. It's got a red stem, red petioles, red coloration in the leaves, all the veins of the leaves, and then the pods have these different shades of red. So I really like working with the red varieties, and they're really beautiful. And then this is a picture from that 60 variety planting at Franny's farm. And I think I like this picture, even though it's now 5 years old. I still use it just to show you that okra is more than just a green pod. And all you're seeing here is the diversity in the pods. There's diversity in the plants, the leaf shape, the stem color, the petiole combinations. The flowers are all of the same look, but they have different levels of red coloration with like red swirls going through the petals. And there's a lot of variation in the okra varieties that already exist. So that's just some of the diversity. And 76 still gets thrown around as a number of varieties that we've grown, but again, this was 5 years ago, so now we've grown hundreds and hundreds of varieties. The USDA has a collection of over 1,000 accessions that I'm slowly working my way through, but now that we've started doing plant breeding, those 1,600 plants that we planted out at the Princeton Seed Farm, each of them is genetically unique. And so effectively each of them has the potential to be their own variety because we've done these crosses. And so I've, over time, stopped thinking about varietal distinctions and just think like okra genetically has infinite potential, and it's just taking somebody to like step into that world and explore that potential. And so that's where we're going with okra. I don't keep track. I'm not being a stamp collector with okra. I'm just like want to explore its potential, and we can do that best by like letting it be what it wants to be. And then this fast forwards to, this is 2021, where we had 100 varieties in the ground, and this was the start of some of that kind of like genetic mix-up idea that is a pretty big concept. I give a whole class on just this one idea. But basically, we've started allowing all these distinct varieties to start sharing pollen with each other, so we can like shake up the genetics of all these heirloom varieties that to some extent have become fairly stagnant. And by kind of like taking that genetic box and just shaking it, we allow all those genetics to like recombine into new and wonderful things. This project got tagged the Ultracross project, so like massive parental population, totally mixed up. And then we plant out the children from that and then just kind of observe and select the varieties that we like that come out of that box. And this is the beginning of the Okra Ultracross. There's some friends that are helping me plant with. That's the same field about 8 weeks later. So the Princeton folks, this is what you're going to see. We're kind of like, we're a little bit smaller than that, the seed farm right now. So this is 2 weeks away maybe. And then 8 weeks away we'll be at this. And then this just keeps getting taller and taller and it becomes a total okra jungle, which is pretty fun. And so a lot of this stuff, as I said, like a single finger can't harvest okra. A lot of it's done in collaboration and community. And these are just some more of our partners that are working with us on the Okra Seed Ultracross. I think that's me. That's the end of the okra section. And then this is just a slide that I'm going to leave here because the Utopian Sea Project in many ways was born out of that initial work that I was doing with okra. I went rogue on the okra on my own and did that okra stuff and had a good time. But then I was like, okay, this is working. People are getting excited about okra. We're talking about okra. We're doing new things with okra. How do we bring it back in and apply this kind of like food forward, celebrating diversity concept with okra to all these other crops. And that was the birth of the Utopian Sea Project, where we set up a non-profit to do similar work with other southern crops and then other experimental crops. And our kind of core values are that we're trying to create options for a changing climate so that farmers can have tools to grow food for us. And then we do a lot of seed-saving regional adaptation. We work with an intense amount of biodiversity to create resilient food systems. And then this celebrating food, flavor, and varieties is always going to be a core of what we do, or the thing that we're always aiming for is really, really exciting, engaging, delicious food systems.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to have Tessa and Chris join together. And also our segment for this, I wanted to mention that Labyrinth is also here, so you can buy, you'll have an opportunity to buy copies of the book for $35. I'm just going to turn on more light. So if you turn those on and then, do you want to test, Tessa?
Test.
Beautiful.
Okra.
I love it. Thank you.
Okra, test.
Was it green?
Hello?
Yes. Thank you.
I'm only going to ask 2 questions because I know who's here and I know there will be folks who have questions. So thanks for coming up. Thanks for working with the seed farm to invite us into the okra oil study. Thanks for writing this book. It's a beautiful book. You can see it on the table. You saw it in the presentation, but it's beautiful all the way through. And it's a light to read, and one of my questions, the second one, is going to actually be about writing. But the first one is just like, our industrial food system is so focused on monoculture and single use and specialization. And I think the theme that runs through the presentation that you gave us today and the work that I know you're doing is it's sort of proper that you end with a conversation about the ultracross and mixing up the genetic diversity. Because I feel like, like if we take corn as the kind of the typical American plant, right? We have a massive amount of acreage planted in corn, monoculture. It's a single product. We're really going for that ear. The stalk grows really tall. You can't do much with it, right? And then we do a lot with that ear of corn. But okra, as a metaphor, is like the opposite of corn, right? Because you have like 1,700 uses, and just like this wide variety of uses. And I think that thinking about the work that you do with the Utopian Sea Project, you're kind of doing that like methodologically too with the Ultracross. And I just kind of wonder, like, where did that come from? Like, why are you seeing the food system really differently in all of these applications? Utopian too, it's not just a farming organization, it's not just a chefing organization, it's like all of these things. So like, can you talk about like this kind of radical diversity approach that you have to your work? And I mean, I had 3 questions, that's one.
Okay. Yes, I can. First of all, I think a clarifying point, we're talking about modern American corn, right?
Right.
The same statement doesn't hold true of indigenous corn culture, which was phenomenal and diverse and beautiful and multifaceted. So in some ways, that's a simple answer to the question. I'm not doing anything new. Because this mentality of using the whole plant and taking a community systems level approach and embracing diversity is an ancient practice that has been, maybe forgotten is not the right word, but like intentional amnesia, like forced upon the population through capitalism, probably. It's like, it's only the last couple of 100 years that the system has changed. And actually, with seeds, it's only the last 200 years that the system has changed from embracing diversity, public plant breeding efforts, a very much farm-forward type of approach to, mega industrialization of the food system. So it's so recent, and yet we forget so quickly that it's really sad. So that's one thing just to acknowledge on a downer. But the other side of that, in terms of the Utopian Sea Project and what we're trying to do with celebrating diversity, I think I was lucky on a couple of levels. One, I came to America as an adult 10 years ago, and I didn't grow up in this culture. And I'm not saying that England is better or worse, but it's different. And so I came here with fresh eyes, almost like a child. And so I think I ended up asking questions that maybe you don't ask because you don't see them. You live in a beautiful city your whole life and you stop seeing it as beautiful, it's just a city. But a new person comes there and visits and it's suddenly beautiful, or you see the problems. And so I think that's what I've done with America to some extent. There's things about America that I think are phenomenal, and there's things that really sadden me. And the Utopian Sea Project was set up in response to some of the things that saddened me. And my other lucky opportunity was that I basically walked into a job at a seed company based on some marketing communication skills I had, not my botanical skills. But because I ended up in that seed company, it gave me like access to an environment where I could apply that kind of naivety and childlike innocence to the seed industry. And so I saw it as a whole, and I think that's maybe the most important point, is that you can break a system down into components, and you can work really hard to address each of those components, but the system's not going to change unless you change the system, not just the individual components. And so the Utopian Sea Project really attempts to make systems level change. We talk about taking a multi-stakeholder approach to food systems change. And that's really hard when it comes to anything, let alone agriculture, because agriculture moves pretty slowly. We're working with the seasons, we're working with the farmers, and we're trying really hard to encourage the adoption of broader biodiversity into our regional food system. And that means that we've got to work with chefs and added value food businesses and farmers and agronomists and universities and food media and everybody eats. So everyone's part of the food system, and if we really want to change the system, we've got to change everybody. And that's hard, but that's what we keep in the back of our heads. And I think that's maybe one thing that makes us a little bit different.
The place that you do focus, obviously, is on single crops, so okra. And I was hoping you might just share a little bit about the other crops that you're excited about right now.
Yes, and I'll do that quickly. We have a lot of southern crops that we focus on, and again, when I say southern crops, they're like currently in the southern foodways, but they often have origins outside of that, whether indigenous food culture, often African diasporic food culture. I'm super excited about collards. We have a collard Ultracross. We do have a lot of collard variety trials. There's a project called the Ellum Collard Project that has been mentioned a couple of times. Collards are delicious and beautiful, and yeah, collards. And then on the, we've just planted out a 50 variety sorghum trial that I'm really excited about. Sorghum's not a crop that I've worked much with, but it has this kind of like seed to stem capacity within it as a crop. We work a lot with climate resilience, so like what crops are super tough and can grow in like extreme weather swings or drought conditions and all that kind of thing. We don't spray anything on our farm, we don't irrigate, we barely fertilize, and we just like put these diverse mixes into the ground and see which ones survive and then save seeds from the survivors, and we're basically breeding crops to be tough or resilient. And if we have food systems resilience, we have food security in uncertain times, which is where I think we're heading. So that's kind of like part of what we're doing with the sorghum. And then the last area, we do a lot of work with tropicals to try and adapt tropical plants to our temperate growing zone, almost in anticipation of a warming climate. And we're being really successful with growing taro. We have about 8 different varieties of taro. The taro is a storage crop. It's delicious. It's a staple across the world. It's an ancient crop. It's just not known or grown very much in our temperate regions. So taro is one that I'm really excited about, and we're doing a lot of work with.
This is my last question, and then I do think we still can take 10 minutes for audience questions, which is, another seed keeper, Petra, she likes to say the revolution has to be irresistible. And you wrote a book on okra, which, was a challenge, writerly challenge. And I just wonder, if you want to say a few words. We're a little bit more nerdy in the bookishness in this region than we are in the farmingness. And I wonder if you want to say a few words about the writerly challenge of writing a book about okra. Because you come to it in a really creative way, and I think you pull it off quite well. So does the James Beard Foundation. So do you want to just say a little bit about the writerly process there?
Yeah, I can do. I have a master's in creative writing. I came to America with that master's and was not being very successful publishing my, in hindsight, terrible novel and my better short story collections. So I wasn't really going anywhere as a fiction writer, even though I still love writing fiction. And I started giving presentations on okra without ever thinking about writing a book about okra. And actually the very first time I ever presented on okra, an agent from Chelsea Green came up to me and said, "You should write a book on okra." And I was like, hell, my novel career is shot, I might as well. And that was literally how it happened. I don't know if I would have written a book on okra without that, but that's what happened. And so my main challenge about writing a whole book on okra was that I had never conceived of it as a book. I was like, this is an hour-and-a-half presentation that I give on okra, and now you want me to write a book. And so it took me a long time to go from, this sounds like a fun project, to actually handing in a proposal that had like a full outline and a well thought through everything. And the process, I think the process I went through to get there was mainly just, I was like, I need to know more about okra. Like, I currently literally don't have enough in my brain to know about okra. And now I feel like I could write multiple books on okra, but at the time I definitely couldn't. And so my first step was just, in nonfiction terms, was just like research. I read a lot and I spoke to a lot of people. All those Southern conferences that I went to, I used to take a little sign with me saying, I'm writing a book on okra. Come and speak to me about okra. And again, 50% of the people just said, yuck, okra, it's slimy. But the other 50% of the people were like okra fanatics, and they would come and speak to me for an hour about okra and tell me about their grandfather and the seed varieties and how they like to cook okra, and people wanted to talk about okra. And so I had about 3 years between it being an idea to actually handing in a proposal that was basically research. And then once I started writing it, I really enjoyed writing, and I actually found the writing process relatively easy once I had all the ideas in my head. And I think I was also lucky in that my editor allowed me to be creative. I think there's a lot of editors in the nonfiction garden world. Chelsea Green is a sustainable publishing press. Like, not a creative fiction press. So I think a lot of editors would have I personify Okra in the book. Okra speaks throughout the book, literally. And I think a lot of editors would have come across that first draft and said, no way, you're not personifying a vegetable, let alone a slimy one, in a book. And my editor, ran with it and let me kind of have that creative license, and I think that made it a funner project for me to write and hopefully to read.
Thank you. Just a few minutes for a couple questions if anyone has them.
Okay. I'll bring the mic. The planters first.
I used to do some shamanic journeying, and mainly it was to animals, but I also did a workshop with Elliot Cowan, who does plant spirit medicine. And so we traveled to the spirits of various plants or flowers, and I connected with columbine plant. And I had some columbine in my garden, and when I got back from this 5-day workshop, it had moved like 40 feet to my back door, and there it was growing. So I wonder if you had thought about doing shamanic work with okra.
I have not thought about doing shamanic work with okra, but I do believe in the intuitive level of the plants, and I actually mentioned this to the students that we're working with this morning, that we do plant breeding work, which is kind of like academic-y and science-y, and we're working with plants on that level that, doesn't give the plants a personality or an individuality. And I've had multiple experiences now where I've worked with plants in a way that's more intuitive, and for reasons unbeknown to me, I've fallen in love with a certain plant and just been like, I can't tell you why, but that is the plant, and that's the one that we're going to work with. And in blind taste trials, that plant is won the taste trials. Out of 60 okra varieties, that was the plant that was turned out to be the highest yielding and the best tasting okra, and I've now been working with that for 5 years. But my initial interaction with it was just 60 varieties, unlabeled in the field, and that one plant, I was like, there's something about you, and I just ran with that. And so that might be a different way to say the same thing, but I think there's something to it. And yeah, using intuition in the field is something that I buy into for sure.
So I'm a total believer, and you're going to be getting a very long email from me after this. But I've got a more practical question. So there's seeds and there's plants, and I really hope that everybody takes some of both and plants some of this okra on their balcony, in their yard. Do you have any suggestions for growing okra in containers or in small spaces? Not everyone has a farm, so what should these folks do with all this seed and plant?
Great question. Thanks.
Or even just how do you grow okra,
Yeah.
and then the container. Yeah.
Okay, so okra likes it hot, which you have here, so you're good on that count. Okra is drought tolerant. That's one of its climate resilient aspects. So it does well in high heat, dry conditions, but it's going to be more productive if you keep it watered. And so we've set up irrigation at the seed farm for our okra, so it's super happy. And if you're going to grow it in containers, that's the biggest thing that you're going to have to stay on top of. It'll just be very slow and not very productive if it's allowed to be dry. So keep it nice and wet. And then, other than that, okra is relatively straightforward. If you buy one of these transplants, the okra is already germinated, and you could just put that in a container. And if you keep it wet and somewhere full sun and warm, it's going to grow and produce okra. I would say that okra has a very impressive root system. It can have a taproot that can be over 5 foot long. It's got lateral root development that's bigger than my arm span all around, and that's if it's allowed to grow unrestrained. So if you were to grow it in a 5-gallon container, it's going to be a little bit stunted. So if you're going to do container growing, the biggest container you can find, it would be the happiest in. But it does grow in containers, and you can maybe try and find a slightly shorter variety to grow that in. In the ground, we do 12-inch spacing in the ground. You can go tighter, but it'll be more compact. You could go wider, and the plants will get bigger and a bit more branchy, but more or less 12 inches. And again, keep it watered, full sun, likes it warm, and you're going to get a lot of okra.
Hello, Chris. My question is about, you said about the deer. We have a lot of deer around here. How deer resistant is it?
I have found almost nothing to be deer resistant if they're hungry enough, including okra. And actually, deer are really clever when it comes to eating, and they tend to find out the most nutrient dense thing in the field and eat that. So I almost always have deer eating either the southern peas in the field or the okra greens that don't have the spines. There's a species of okra that doesn't have spines, and the deer always go to that one. And sometimes they'll walk past another okra variety to get to the leaves without the spines. And so the main damage I get on my okra crops is the deer are kind of like just, I don't know if they're drunk or what, but they like, or maybe they're trying to rub up against the okra, but they break the okra. So they don't necessarily chew the okra. It grows so fast and it's so productive that I don't find that to be a big issue, but they sometimes snap entire stalks, and that's problematic. So I would say no, it's not deer resistant. In fact, it's potentially deer susceptible. So high fences, guns, and dogs.
Grow with spines.
All grow the ones with spines, yeah.
But the groundhogs will also eat it, and we do have groundhogs here.
And balls.
The groundhogs
Yeah.
eat mine.
The squirrel also, they dig into the ground. Squirrel.
Yes.
Yeah. So how deep we can plant in the soil?
The seed?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, the question is how deep to plant the seed in the soil.
Yes.
And the general rule of thumb is you can kind of plant the depth of the seed. So with okra, you can go about 1/4 of an inch down. The main thing if you're going to grow okra from seed is it's got a really thick seed coat, and so it really benefits from being soaked. So usually before I direct seed okra into the ground, I would put it in a jar of water overnight and just let it really imbibe a lot of water. That'll trigger germination, soften the hard kernel, and then when you put it in the ground, it should germinate fairly quickly. But it can take a little time to germinate okra if the soil is a little cool. But this time of the year, if you soak the seeds and get it in the ground, you should see it pop up within a week.
So it should be like inch deep?
1/4 of an inch.
Quarter.
Yeah.
And how many people here grow okra? I feel like we have a lot of okra wisdom. Okay.
Oh, I just wondered, are there any companion plants that grow well with it, or can you understory plant it? But, I don't know, lettuces or small grasses.
Yeah, so the question was, can you a companion plant or understory plant okra in the field? One thing I do often is plant southern peas along the base with a kind of like a Three Sisters mentality. Ujama seeds talk about the African sisters. And so you can have your okra for the corn replacement as a solid stalk, and then plant the southern peas that will vine up the okra.
Oh, never mind.
And then you can
We don't grow them here, I don't know what they are.
They're cowpeas. Cowpeas.
Cowpeas.
Yeah.
But they're for a cover crop then, or do you eat?
You eat them. Yeah, cowpeas are really tasty. So yeah, you can grow them as a food crop. And then you can also do a watermelon planting if you grow watermelons here to replace the squash. So then you've got your 3 African diasporic crops in one companion planting, because that will suppress weeds. So that's something that I like to do often. But okra forms a real strong stalk. So most climbing, you didn't have to do southern peas. You could do a pole bean of okra, and it would be just fine. If you do an understory planting, it's going to get shaded out real quickly because okra forms a real dense canopy.
Not for me.
Not for you.
No, that failed miserably. Year.
What variety are you growing? If I can ask.
I've tried a lot of varieties. I think last year was just too dry.
It'll definitely grow slowly if it's
And I
dry.
get corn borer, or some borer that often ruins the stalk.
You may need to try the Ultracross.
How long it takes?
Ultracross
How long it takes to?
to maturity. So the question is, how many days does okra take to mature? It's very variety dependent, but on average, you could be expecting first flowering at about 60 days.
Can you share some more qualities about the cooking oil? You said it has a taste of olive oil, but like smoke point, cooking uses.
So the okra seed oil is very, 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 very under-researched. So there's not a lot of information out there. It's, and I'm also not a food chemist, but things that I have read say that it's got, its oxidation level is pretty good, so it's shelf stable. It's, for a cold pressed oil, it was saying about 175 Celsius. I'm not sure what the Fahrenheit conversion is, but it's relatively, like, I think that would be a medium heat oil. But in terms of the culinary applications that I've seen it used most often, I think that's mainly because Clay Oliver, the guy that's pressing and selling it, is like $15 for a 3-ounce bottle. Most people are using it as like a kind of a culinary salad dressing type oil and not really a cooking oil. But I've definitely, I've fried eggs in it and baked stuff in it and that kind of thing. So it's a pretty robust oil, I think.
Thank you.
Jared, if you want to play with okra, we just planted 1,700 plants. We can talk.
Just one quick.
Yes.
I'm just curious if you ever stumbled upon any okra dishes out there in the wild that knocked your socks off. Like outside of your own creations, what's the best okra that you've eaten?
Oh, wow. I like okra in all ways. So there's a restaurant in Nashville called Chaipani that do shoestring. They do shoestring okra fries, which are super, super simple, but they basically take the long okra and slice it lengthways in real thin strips, and they deep fry it so it goes crunchy and crispy and a little bit charred. And then they dress it with lime. And there's like a culinary thing where if you pair okra with an acidic food, like okra and tomatoes, pickled okra, or in this case lime, then it kind of like, it cuts through the slime, like the acidic cuts through the slime. So if you're worried about that mucilage, there's some like mitigation strategies you can use in the kitchen. And so these okra fries are just kind of like a little bit sour with the lime. It cuts through any slime feel. They're just super crunchy and salty, and there's the fat, and they're just like, they're absolutely delicious. And this is an Indian street food restaurant, and I interviewed him, and he's I forget the numbers. It's like an insane amount of okra he goes through a week, like hundreds of pounds of okra every week. And I think we worked out that he was probably one of the biggest sellers of fried okra in the South, even though it's like an Indian street food seller. So that one is like, I really enjoy them. But I'm personally a huge fan of gumbos. I think okra and gumbo is just like, and that's like a direct link to West Africa. Like there's a Senegalese soup, and then even the derivative of the word gumbo comes from the West Africa, or I won't quote it right, I forget which language in Africa it comes from, but it's kigombo is the word, it is the African word for okra, which came across and became gumbo. And yeah, just the silkiness that the mucilage in okra offers to gumbo is absolutely delicious. And there's so many different variations of gumbo, but I really like a good gumbo.
Good last.
Just an oil press for family size.
The one you saw in the picture, yeah, the one you saw in the picture is a hand-cranked oil press, which I used for my family for a long time, and it's Piteba, Piteba. It's made in the Netherlands. There's a few knockoffs out there, but I like the Piteba. It's not actually that expensive. I think it's like, with shipping, it's $100 or something. It's probably more now, but it's affordable, I think. And it's really good for most seed oils, certainly the higher oil content ones, pumpkin seeds, hazelnuts, walnuts, all that type of stuff. You get good oil out of that. It's not great at pressing okra seeds because it needs about 30 to 35% oil content in the seed, and okra doesn't have it. So I actually broke my press trying to press okra seed. I fixed it, it's fine.
Well, Chris and Tessa, thank you so much. It was an amazing lecture. I learned so much. I'm sure everybody else did. But thank you so much for coming and talking about your book, and please buy it.